Joined now by Fianna Fáil Councillor Paul McAuliffe, who represents Ballymun, Finglas and Glasnevin. Councillor McAuliffe, welcome to the programme.
Thanks, George.
You're concerned about derelict sites in your particular area. What's happening?
I suppose if you drive around the city, George, you can see very clearly that there's a large number of development sites that have been left, I suppose, vacant for a long time. But more importantly, they've been left with this kind of ugly wooden hoarding that surrounds them. And in many cases, it's rotten, it's falling, it's dilapidated. And if many of the landowners who had originally applied for permission on these sites had suggested a wooden hoarding as a permanent boundary, it wouldn't have been approved. And so I don't see why it should be accepted. What we need to do is do something which gives them some incentive and a penalty if they don't comply. And I'm suggesting a hoarding tax, which would effectively charge them a penalty or a financial fee for every square foot of hoarding which they leave up after construction has finished.
All right, I get penalties. Penalties are easy. Incentives are harder. What do you see as an incentive?
Well, I think any landowner that doesn't, I suppose land has its rights, but it also has its responsibility. So any landowner that doesn't comply with it will face the penalty, or if they put up a proper boundary, a brick wall or an iron railing, then they wouldn't be subject to it. But I also think, George, for willing developers, there is the possibility of perhaps, let's say, temporarily opening up that space as a public amenity, and over time, if there are significant costs associated with that, that could be offset against future development levies on that site. So the city will gain something, and over time then the developer may gain something. But what we need to do is to start to look at these sites and to prevent people hanging on to them for 5, 10, 15 years waiting for a property curve to move. The city can't afford that.
Now, I don't know, are you a movie buff by any chance?
I do listen to Fionn every now and again, but I'm not sure I could regard myself as an expert.
Well, there was a great movie called Sister Act with Whoopi Goldberg. Do you remember that?
I do.
And the church was in a really run-down area, and the nuns went out. And funny enough, when I heard I was doing this with you, Sister Act came into my mind, because there were all these derelict sites, derelict motor cars, and they had innovative painting, they had innovative uses for the derelict cars. Isn't there a way somehow, because I in Ballymun and Finglas and Glasnevin, you may have higher than average unemployment statistics, you have a whole pile of other things, that we could get people involved, creating pride in their community by making a lot of these derelict spaces better, and also, as you rightly point out, perhaps converting them to public use.
And, you know, George, that is happening on the ground. There's a great bunch of ladies in Finglas who for 5 years looked after the shopping centre while it was in receivership. There's allotments opening up in the city. But often what happens is, when the receiver owns the property or has control of the property, there's no financial incentive or reward for an accountancy firm approving some of these schemes. So what we need to do is to put in a penalty to those people who don't cooperate, and there is an incentive then for those who will.
All right. Just how big a problem have we got here?
Well, the derelict sites register has 34 sites around the city. Now, anybody that's familiar with Dublin will know that there's far more than that. And that's one of the difficulties, because the derelict sites interpretation is very strict. It needs to essentially have a secure boundary, and it then will not be listed. What we need to see is a much lower bar set in terms of what is regarded as a derelict site. So as I say, a wooden hoarding that's left for 5 years, it's not an appropriate boundary for a site, and therefore it should be included in the derelict sites register. Perhaps not reaching the higher levels of fines that would apply to such a site, but certainly looking at the style and the type and the appearance of the boundary.
Absolutely. Now, it may not be a fair comparison, but just recently I read that the Montrose Hotel, that has been emptied for I don't know how many years, is to be converted into student accommodation by UCD. Now, I appreciate UCD had to buy the place. I understand that. And with derelict sites, we won't have the money to buy them. But we do need, because these are going to be around for quite a while. And I was in Tala yesterday, where there are a large number of retail outlets empty, and they look worse than they really are, because all there is just one sign which says for rent or something, and then they look blatantly empty. They create, like in my mind, it created a place, well, there's nothing going on in Cllr. Do you know what I mean? And it must be the same for you, that this gives psychologically the wrong message when you see any kind of derelict.
Well, I suppose there's two issues there, George. There's the high street, and then there's also these development sites. The development sites are a much bigger issue, and I believe the council is looking at that and issuing perhaps something like a vacant site levy. I'm not so certain that that's the way forward. I think the way forward, as you say, would be to incentivise economic activity. And so I have a proposal on the council at the moment around rates. So if a shop in Finglas is empty, the landlord receives a 50% discount while it's empty. But yet we can't offer that same type of discount to somebody who would take up a new lease, as someone starting off a business in those first crucial years. And that's what I would like us to see, to first have a much more flexible approach to commercial rates, so we could incentivise new shops, and so that the high street could become again a place where new ideas are tested in the market, and where guys maybe who've been unemployed for a number of years might see a retail opportunity as a possible career.
All right, thank you so much for joining me. Cllr Paul McAuliffe, he's Fianna Fáil, of course, and he represents Ballymun, Finglas and Glasnevin. We're about 140 miles from Finglas, Ballymun and Glasnevin. We're in G Hotel in Galway, where it is a gorgeous western afternoon. They might get more rain than anywhere else over a 12-month period, but today it would appear the rest of the country is the rain, and we've got the sun. The Right Hook with George Hook, 53106, the number for your text messages.